Rocket Knight Adventures may not be the most underrated game of all time, but its main character Sparkster is easily one of the most underrated video game characters of all time. Sparkster and Rocket Knight Adventures were born in the early 90s after Sonic became a household name and every gaming company in the business is trying to cash in on his success and create a badass mascot of their very own. And while most of these animal game mascots and their respective titles are best left forgotten, there's at least one that shouldn't be. And that of course is Sparkster in his first game, Rocket Knight Adventures. What makes this game great is not so much its concept, but its execution. The game design has a staggering amount of variety and balance that feels familiar but never redundant. It's far from the most difficult game out there, but beginners will probably run out of continues before they see the credits roll. The artistic design is so rich with characters and environments, I wouldn't be surprised if there were plans for an anime or a Saturday morning cartoon. Throw in a unique little gimmick, perfect controls, a fun catchy soundtrack, and you've got one solid package. So, even though Sparkster was just a ripoff trying to cash in on Sonic the Hedgehog, that doesn't change the fact that Rocket Knight Adventures is still one of the finest games on the Genesis and one of the finest action platformers of the 16-bit era. Sparkster is a possum. Or a possum. A possum. Not possum? What's the difference? Anyway, this may sound ridiculous, but then again, we've accepted the idea of a Bandicoot and a Lombax as video game characters, so why not an opossum? Or possum. A possum. A possum. But that's not why we love Sparkster. The reason Sparkster is so endearing is he's given so much character. Not only does he just look cool with his goggles, armor, and jetpack, he's genuinely well animated and fun to control. He's given a whole range of emotions, faces, sound effects, and the motherfucker's just cute. Adorable. Not to mention that word on the street is, he's a sucker for a good chili dog.
Don't forget the peppers.
At the time, Sparkster was a welcome change of pace from all the Sonic imitators because he wasn't trying to be some badass with a bad attitude. One thing Sparkster had over all the others was a more traditional, timeless look. Sparkster is still just as awesome now as he was back in '93. Just look at him. He's a knight with a jetpack. You can't top that! Man, I wish that t-shirt offer was still good. But it's not just our hero that's fun to look at. The entire world of Rocket Knight Adventures is so well conceived and animated. I go as far as to say that it houses some of the greatest and most memorable graphics on the Genesis. All of the environments, enemies, and bosses have a level of polish to them that really makes the look of this game shine. It's one of the few Genesis games that truly gave the graphically superior Super Nintendo a run for its money. Now allow me to backpedal for just a minute here. We were talking about the mascot craze in the 90s and all the shitty games that came about, but there's definitely one game I really want to talk about. There's this terrible, terrible Genesis game called, and I'm not joking, Awesome Possum Kicks Dr. Machino's Butt, which may be the most radically stupid video game title ever. Awesome Possum Kicks Dr. Machino's Butt? God, that's awful. Now, I've never actually played this game, but just by looking at it, I can tell this is one of the worst video game mascots and my pick for the worst game title ever. But then again, I've never actually played it, so if there's any video game reviewers out there, angry video game reviewers out there, who want to give this game a shot, I'd be more than interested to see how terrible this game probably is, because that's just not my department. Speaking of which, back to the good shit. The gameplay of Rocket Knight Adventures feels like a greatest hits collection of classic action platforming. Each of the game's 7 levels is divided up into different stages and boss fights, each of them feeling like a different classic action platformer you've played before. And this isn't surprising when you realize the game was designed by Nobuya Nakazato, who made Contra titles like Alien Wars for the Super Nintendo, Hardcore for the Genesis, and a personal favorite of mine, Shattered Soldier for the PS2. But unlike Mr. Nakazato's other titles, which are among some of the most difficult games of all time, Rocket Knight Adventures is not really that tough. Well, not on its default difficulty, which is actually easy. But if you want a challenge, you can play this game on hard, where you start with no lives, everything kills you in one hit, and you have no continues. That's right, you pretty much have to beat the whole game without ever getting hit, which puts the American Splatterhouse 2's Game Master difficulty to absolute shame. At least there you got 2 hits. Ah, so good. And it's on Virtual Console now. Oh, sorry. So I've been talking a lot about how Rocket Knight Adventures is similar to other classics you might be familiar with, but I don't want to give you the impression that there isn't much unique about this game. Trust me, nothing could be further from the truth. There is something you've probably noticed about Sparkster that I haven't mentioned yet. His jetpack. He is a Rocket Knight after all. This little gimmick was really what made this game unique. Simply hold down the A or C button, wait for your meter to fill up, and release. You can shoot in all 8 directions, which will launch you until you hit an enemy, ricochet off a wall, or run out of power. Or you can just release while standing still. I really like the way the developers handled this. You're forced to use the jetpack a lot less than you'd think. You can get through large portions of the game without ever really using it, but if you experiment, you can discover ways to beat levels faster and bosses easier. It's a game that rewards you for being creative, and I like that in a game. Another awesome thing is even though Sparkster shoots energy from a sword, getting close enough to enemies to actually hit them with the blade of your sword does considerably more damage. Some bosses can be taken out in a record time if you stand just right, but they'll whip your ass just as fast if you get too cocky. It's a good risk-reward system that flourishes thanks to perfect hit detection and perfect controls. It's the type of game that's only hard if you suck. Actually, that's not really fair to say, because there are a couple of bosses and little traps that'll kill you at least once before you'll understand what you're supposed to do. So it's easy when you know how. So pretty much Rocket Knight Adventures is absolutely brilliant in nearly every way, and I simply cannot recommend it enough. And now for the time where we talk about why this game never really caught on. So why did this game fail to catch on? Well, it didn't. It wasn't the smash hit blockbuster it had every right to be, but it did spawn 2 sequels, one for the Genesis and another for the Super Nintendo. Now some of you are saying, wait a minute, there was only one sequel, Sparkster, and you'd be half right. Both games are called Sparkster, but the Genesis version and the Super Nintendo version are actually completely different games produced by completely different teams in-house at Konami. As for how these games measure up to Rocket Knight Adventures, I can't really say right now for 2 reasons. 1, I simply don't have time to review 2 more games right now in this video, and 2, I don't own either of these games, so I haven't played them in years. I remember not liking the Genesis version back when I was little, but that was a long time ago, and I've never even played the Super Nintendo version, so I'll have to save the Sparkster games for another review down the line. Alright gang, that about wraps it up. Now it's time for my favorite part of the video. Alright, well, until next time, this is the Happy Nerd saying, don't be negative. Cheers.